I've been trading for almost 5 years, and this thing that I'm going to be telling you today is something that took me, I think, out of the 5 years that I've been trading, it took me around 3 years for me to start appreciating it, start to apply it. Though it's a little embarrassing because it's something that's very obvious, and I'm sure that you have heard it before, but I simply just ignored it. Right? I was switching from strategy, changing strategy, thinking that maybe I might become a little bit profitable, just a little bit, so like that I can start to see results. But I was just ignoring this one thing. Even if I changed from BTMM to ICT to price action, all those strategies worked, but I was ignoring this one simple thing, right? So what is this thing? First of all, I want us to agree that for you to become profitable, for you to just become profitable, you have to make more and you have to make more money and lose less money, right? So like the rate that you are winning has to be greater than the rate that you are losing money, right? So that's the simple one thing that I was ignoring, that I was not taking into consideration, right? So this simple thing is risk to reward ratio, right? It's just one thing that can change your strategy that you're thinking is failing, or you are ignoring that one thing that you're ignoring, but it's actually going to be beneficial to you if you start implementing it in the correct way, right? Of course, most of the times we're just worried about how much money am I going to make on this trade? How much money am I going to make if my entry, if the trade moves for 3 hours, for 4 hours in this direction, if it reaches here, I would have made this much. But we're ignoring the risk part. How much are you risking in order to gain that? Right. So that's one thing that's very important, that's very crucial, that we keep on avoiding. So like we don't want to accept, we keep on ignoring, though it is the most important thing. Now that I know it, now that I appreciate it more, it's that one thing that's very important before you take even a trade. Even if you're before you evaluate if you it's what you use to evaluate if you should enter or not, right? That's the most that's the most crucial thing for you to for you to first understand, for you to first see if, is it worth it for me to take this trade. But it's just something that we ignore, right? You just have to win more and lose less when you lose. Know that however, whichever strategy that you're using, there's no strategy that's 100% perfect. That's a fact, that's guaranteed, right? So for that strategy, when you lose, right, you might be winning, you might have a 90% winning streak, right? But that 10% chance that you lose, you might lose everything, right? So that's why risk reward ratio is so crucial. That's why risk reward ratio is so important. But how can you implement? What's the correct way of implementing risk reward ratio? So as for me personally, I don't believe in risking 1%, 2%. Why? Because my account is too small. I don't have a lot of money, right? I'm trading small accounts, right? $50 accounts, $100 accounts, $100 or at most $200, right? I don't think there is one time, but I wouldn't even consider it. But most of the time, that's like the range that I'm trading, right? So one is 1%, risking 1% or 2% of your account is something that's unreasonable. I mean, I can't risk 1% for $100. I'm risking $1. That's not should I say what? That's not feasible. I can't work with that. In fact, no one can work with risking $1, just $1, right? So which percentage do I use? Which percentage do I risk, right? I risk 10% usually. It's usually 10%, though sometimes it may go up to 15%, but yeah, it's so like that. Why do I say that 10%? 10% is so like the sweet spot. I think it's not the sweet spot as such, but even if you are trading a prop firm, you are risking, you think that you are risking 1% or 2% of your account. Let's say you've got let's say a $10,000 account, right? You are risking 1% of your account, right? Which means you are risking what? $100, right? That's 1% of your account. But in reality, if you lose 10% of the whole account, it means that that account is taken away from you, right? So in reality, you only have $1,000 to lose, right? So if you are risking $100, it's the same thing as you are risking 10% of your account, because when you reach 10%, you're going to lose that money. So it's that's it's just that simple. Is even if you are trading a prop firm, most likely you are risking 10% without you knowing. You're thinking that you are risking 1%, but in reality, you're actually risking 10% instead of what? 1% of that account, right? So as for me, I risk 10%. So how do I do this exactly? Right. So let's say I've got $100 account, right? For my $100 account, I enter a position, right? Before I enter a position, remember risk reward ratio, you calculate it before you enter a position, right? Before you enter a position, right? What you first have to do is I'm risking 10% of my account, right? So in this case, I'm risking $10, right? So if I'm entering right here, this position, I'm entering a buy this position, right? So in my, so like my setup to be invalidated, right? My stop loss is to be here, right? So now you have to calculate between, from here, from my entry point, from where to where my setup will be invalidated or where I want to place my stop loss, right? So which lot size is reasonable? Which lot size should I put so that when my stop loss is hit, it's $10. It's equal to $10. Don't just start by entering a $50, 50-cent lot, right? And then now you are calculating where I should place your stop loss. No. What you first do is find where your entry point is, right? If you're entering here, right, your stop loss is here. See, if I use a dollar lot size, I'm going to be losing $50, right? So if I use a 50-cent lot size, I'm going to be losing $25, right? So I should be using 20 cents lot size so that I risk that $10, right? So like we are calculating the lot size is going to determine the what the loss. So like the loss, the stop loss, the gap, the distance between what your entry point and where your setup will be invalidated, your stop loss is going to determine the lot size that you're using. Don't just use a fixed lot size because every setup is different, right? Another setup might have a 20 pip stop loss, right? So you use a different lot size. Another one might have a 10%, 10 pip stop loss, right? So of course you're going to increase the lot size, right? So it's determined by the distance between your entry and your stop loss. This is what determines this lot size that you're going to be using. That's the correct way. I don't know if it's the correct way, but that's how I'm using what my stop loss nowadays, right? That's how I'm using. So like that's how I'm trading. If it's wrong, then feel free to help me. I'm open to learn. I'm curious to learn, right? If there's something that I'm doing wrong, then just comment in the comment section down below. And if you find this helpful to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and even share the content. And remember, you are the bridge between where you are and where you want to be. So do the hard work, especially when you don't feel like it.